Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a 5-day program on an exploration of the phenomenon of God. This is an issue that we've touched on before, but it generated so much interest. We are now deepening our dialogue. Today marks the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. And I think, particularly given that this is a discussion about God, it's appropriate to just take a few minutes and remember this day. It was on October 7th of 2023, in the early hours of the dawn, that several hundred Hamas fighters, almost all in their 20s, who had never been allowed out of Gaza, given the siege and the encasement of Gaza by the Israelis since 2008, in conjunction with hundreds of rockets that were shot from Gaza across Israel, broke through the perimeters and ended up in the carnage that followed, leaving 1,139 Israelis and other nationals dead, and capturing 251 hostages that they took back with them into Gaza and secreted them in various nooks and crannies and tunnels, 101 of which still remain today. One of the puzzling aspects of that day was the fact that the Israelis vaunted for their military security and their instantaneous capacity to respond, did nothing for 3 or 4 hours after the incursion. And then when they responded, it's estimated that of the 1,139 people that were killed, mostly civilians, the Israelis ended up killing many, if not most of those, because the target of Hamas was to get the hostages in an operation they called Al-Aqsa Flood. Al-Aqsa being the holy site on top of Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, the site at which Muhammad ascended into the heaven in a holy vision in the 7th century AD. Since that time, the Israeli response, which was first articulated by Netanyahu on October 8th, echoed by the defense minister Gallant, both of whom said that the Israeli goal was the complete elimination of Hamas, the eradication of Hamas. Gallant said there would be a complete siege on Gaza, no water, no food, no electricity. Nothing would be allowed to move. And then began the most savage assault on a small population of 2.3 million people crammed into an area 5 miles by 25 miles long, having no place to go. Normally, there's in war, people flee. They go somewhere else. But in Gaza, the uniqueness of Gaza is there was nowhere to escape to, because the Israelis had cut off all the borders, including the sea. And the Palestinians, having no army, no infrastructure, no air force, no surface-to-air missiles, none of the accoutrements of a modern state, over the last 365 days have been victimized by a massacre, a genocide that is unprecedented in modern times, and in some cases, unprecedented in the entire history of warfare. "800 health facilities were destroyed, 50% of which were destroyed in the first 30 days, including all the children's hospitals. 175 media journalists were killed. That's in addition to the hundreds that were imprisoned and tortured, a record not equaled in any war in modern history. 90% of the entire 2.3 million Gazans were displaced. 96% as of today are suffering from acute hunger and starvation. Children continue to die of starvation. 41,000 people were killed, and that's the official count. It's estimated that there's another 10 to 15,000 that are still under the rubble. And because the Israelis have destroyed all infrastructure, ambulances, earth-moving equipment, it's not possible to dig under the rubble. Mostly women and children. 16,000 of the 41,000 by official count have been children. That's just the dead. Over 100,000 people have been wounded. 20,000 children have been wounded. And over 1,000 have been victims of blown away limbs. There are more children amputees in Gaza after a year of genocide than any known similar percentage in any modern war. And the Israelis have egregiously and brazenly broken every international law and moral norm in holding an entire population hostage and killing indiscriminately as many people as they can. As of today, there's been 905 entire families completely wiped out. The way they're doing that is through AI. The Israeli military has an app called "Where is Daddy?" And that app tracks all the cell phones. And the app monitors cell phones, calling cell phones, and when they're on, when they're off. And when someone who is a suspect for one reason or another, toward the end of the day, comes to a place where the cell phone is stationary, the Israelis send in fighter aircraft or drones or launch missiles from tanks and blow up the entire building. There's no precision guided weaponry being used in Gaza. They're all, for the most part, imprecision, 2,000-pound bombs. That's what genocide looks like. The indiscriminate slaughter of people. And yet today, after 365 days of this, as protests are being convened all over the world, including here in Washington, where I am, everything is sealed off. Police are everywhere. Hamas launched 5 rockets that hit Tel Aviv. And even though there's no symmetry between the Israeli war machine and what Hamas, mostly 20-something young men with a few rifles and rocket launchers, still, after 365 days, Hamas is able to retaliate. And this reminds us on this first anniversary of the comment that Henry Kissinger made in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. He said, the Viet Cong won because they did not lose. The US lost because it did not win. And that's what we're seeing today, not only in Gaza and the West Bank, but with the Houthis in Yemen, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and more fundamentally against Iran as a nation state. The Houthis, Hezbollah, like Hamas, are really ragtag militia, like what happened with the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in 1942, as the Germans came into the Warsaw Ghetto to destroy everything, and Chaim Edelman, a 20-year-old young Jewish man, organized some people, and they went down into the sewers of Warsaw and fought the Germans for 30 days. That's Hamas. They're still standing. Israel's losing. Hezbollah is fighting them back in southern Lebanon. And most importantly, Iran is taking Israel on. And here there's no asymmetry. Iran has an army. Iran is an equipped nation state of nearly 70 million people. And the missile attack that Iran launched last week shocked the Israelis and the Americans because they got through the Iron Dome and hit bases in the Negev and other military facilities. So the situation in which we find ourselves on this day that will be remembered, like 9/11 and other December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, will be remembered by history, is a time where the world is closer to war than it's ever been in that part of the world in terms of regional war, as the United States and Israel continue to work seamlessly together not only around the massacres in Gaza and the West Bank, but against the Houthis and the Hezbollah and the Iranians. You may not know, but General Kurilla, the head of U.S. Central Command in Berlin, flew to Israel over the weekend to sync up around the attack that's forthcoming on Iran. The United States has 43,000 troops in the Middle Eastern region, aircraft carriers, destroyers are in the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. Because Israel is only able to do this because of the United States of America. And the entire rest of the world, almost literally outside the United States and the G7, sees what's happening for what it is, condemns what's happening for what it is, calls for a ceasefire and negotiations. And every time, the United States blocks it in the UN and allows Israel to continue the carnage. I want to close with the following comment, because we're talking about God this week. The supreme irony, the tragedy of what's going on is that the people that endured the worst genocide in history, the Holocaust, are now seeing the state of Israel commit genocide in its turn. And not against a foreign people, but their own cousins. Because the Jews and the Arabs are both Semites. And that, as I said before on Humanity Rising, is the most excruciating part of the reality that we witness. And I want to close with an image, a story from Elie Wiesel, who was a young boy in Auschwitz. And he wrote a book really for which he received the Nobel Peace Prize called Night, along with many other books. And in that book, he tells the story of two men and a young boy who were caught stealing bread because they were starving. And they were summarily executed by the Germans. They were hung, and all the camp had to come out and watch them being hung. The men died quickly. The young boy was so thin, he kept jerking on the gallows. And as Elie Wiesel stood there in the line, he heard someone say, "Where is God? Where is God?" And there was silence. Then a man a few rows back said, "God is here. God is hanging on the gallows. God is hanging this day on the gallows of Gaza." Thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity Rising as we take on these issues. I know that I've spoken strongly today, but this is a very strong historical event that's going to challenge Israel, Judaism, Christianity, America, the Abrahamic notion of God for some time to come. And it's our willingness to confront this tragic complexity that is the mark of our moral maturity. I want to now introduce my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who you all know because he's been moderating for me in my absence. I've been traveling rather relentlessly over the last 2 weeks, but I'm now back. And so, Dr. Tom, I turn the program over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and welcome back. I wouldn't have expected anything less from you today, and really appreciate your opening comments. And it does, it does put this week into perspective in many respects. My good friend and colleague Michael Putz, who he and I did the first Future of God series a couple of months ago, and it was so well received that we decided to do a second one. Hadn't anticipated that this week would be the week that we would be doing this series, but as fate, as life, as the world would have it, we're here this week to engage in a deep conversation on the future of God. And in the last series, we talked about what's happening in the world with the polycrises of whether it's climate change, the conflicts, or other challenges that humanity is facing, and the meaning crisis that particularly our young, but I think all beings on the planet are faced with the challenges of the meaning crisis. Have brought us to this place as a species where we believe, and part of what we'll be discussing this week, that God has a unique role in the world, in the universe, in the cosmos, and in our discussions this week. So with that, I'll invite my friend and colleague Michael Putz to join us and help frame this week for us, Michael.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, it's a very solemn day. And yeah, we were planning this for September, Tom. We didn't try to line these things up this way. But we're really fortunate in the speaker we have today who's going to join us in dialogue. I want to keep it short because we've already had a lot of I want to get to our speaker, but I want to say that basically one of the things we talked about in our last Future of God session, Tom, is that independent of people's belief about theism or God or secularism, we are facing a polycrisis and we are facing a meaning crisis, and the two of them are feeding off of each other. Rightly or wrongly, the West used to have a shared meaning-making structure that was heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian values. Nietzsche said God was dead 150 years ago. And I think a large part of Western society is secular or spiritual, but not religious, or the nuns nowadays. We're no longer a Christocentric society from that perspective, especially among the young. And people have been seeking new ways of trying to make meaning, but some of those, there's been some concern that the shared meaning-making structures we have in our culture aren't giving the answers we need for us to be able to come together and be able to create a shared society that can grapple with these great problems, whether it's the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, warfare, poverty, inequality, social justice, racism. It's very important that we have a shared meaning-making context as a society so we can work together to help overcome those problems. And so the question is, does God have a role in making these things better? Does God have a role in the second quarter of the 21st century? We're almost at 2025. Does God have a role in a postmodern world in terms of being able to help us make sense of our world, to be able to work together and to be able to hopefully grapple with all of the great challenges we're facing? So that's the theme of the week. Various people here do believe that a relationship with God is actually constructive and helpful, can actually make a major difference in the 21st century. But as we like to say, I think we're going forward, not back. We're not going back to an old conception. We're going forward into a new conception that incorporates understandings of modernism and postmodernism. We're not rejecting those things or going backwards. Any future of God, quote unquote, has to incorporate all of the things we've learned as a society in the last 150 years. So I'm really grateful to have this wonderful week of speakers here and to hear what they have to say about how God informs their ability to make meaning with their comrades, with communities, local and global, and to help solve major problems around the world. So with that, Tom, I think you introduce Rabbi Kat, please.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Rabbi Kat Zavis is with us today. And just delighted to have you here to help us kick off this week and to bring your wisdom and your perspective to this conversation about the future of God and the role that God has to play in supporting and helping us make meaning of what's going on. So welcome. Love to have you share any opening comments before we get into our rich and deep conversation.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you. Opening comments could go on for a long time, so I will try on the question of God. So that's a big opening, Tom. But I will. I'll try to keep it focused. And Jim, I want to thank you for those thoughtful, profound, and challenging opening comments that you made. It's a difficult season for Jews right now, regardless of where you stand on what's been unfolding, because it's inevitable that we have to ask ourselves the question, where is God in this moment? And then we're in the middle of the high holidays, in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when God takes on a very interesting and different vision than one that I normally hold and one that I normally speak about. And as I was saying to my congregants and people came to our services, at the high holidays, one of the things that I ask us to hold is the possibility that the divine, and I give it lots of different names, cosmic consciousness, the pathfinder. In the Torah, it's El Shaddai, the breasted one, the wounded one, the one that sees. So 1,000 different faces and names of God. And in the high holidays, we're asked to suspend for some of us, our narrow, suspend our perceptions or doubts of who or what this God is, and to hold the possibility that maybe there is a force in the universe that is perhaps controlling or unfolding the universe. And it's a big ask, because we want to believe that we have that control. So that's a big ask, and I don't always embrace that ask myself, but it is an ask that this time of year, as we pray, and what is prayer, right? But that we pray that something will transform. And yes, we have to transform ourselves, and that's a big part of the high holy days, and then we work to transform the world. But that something could possibly unfold, or that could manifest, that's beyond each of us as individuals and beyond us as a collective, and contains the present, past, and future, that could offer us something different than what we're living in right now, which is quite horrific and astoundingly tragic. So I want to just offer that as we have this conversation of the divine, that we also hold the possibility that there is something beyond us that I would love to sweep in and fix this mess that we've made. Um, although that is not the God that I believe in, but I do believe that there is a force that transcends all of us. And I'll say more of that in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, just delighted to have you with us today. I'll share a perspective and would love to engage you in the conversation. So I hold that as human beings, we're both a point and a wave. You know, as an individual, I have my own relationship, my own experiences with God. And whether it's in nature or you know, work I've done, feeding the homeless or other community activities, I've been part of that wave of the, you know, call it the consciousness, the collective, the connection with God. And so when I think about the, you know, the role that God can play, both as an individual and as a species, each of us have moments where we've had that connection with God. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that and how God manifests. And particularly, I think where we'd like to take the conversation today is around the mystical God.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm always cautious to say that each of us have had an experience of God because people have such resistance to that term, given the ways in which religion has been co-opted by power and empire that often ends up, and violence that often ends up creating a lot of pain for people. But I do think that each of us have a connection and yearn to have a connection, and maybe that's even more important, with something greater than ourselves, something that extends beyond us. And I too can think of it as us being a drop of water in a wave or in the ocean, and then we become part of that ocean, particularly when we die, but at times in our lives, right? We're just a drop in the bucket. And for me, the mystical God is that God that lives within me and lives within all of the universe. And the Kabbalists have this beautiful teaching that God was in this vessel, and God became so powerful, so magical, so huge that it couldn't possibly be contained in a vessel. And the vessel broke, and all these sparks of divine light became what we now know as the universe. And in that breaking of the vessel, we've lost, as we spread further and further around this planet, and I'm only going to speak to this planet, but even the universe, we've lost connection with the fact that we're all part of this vessel.
Mm.
And so I often, when I'm saying a Jewish prayer called the Shema, I say it the first time when I imagine this vessel breaking and us spreading out, and I'm calling out, like, yeah, we want to be separate beings, and there's value in us each bringing our own spark of divine light and divine intelligence to this world. And we've lost the fact that we are a vessel. And so when I say the Shema the second time, I try to imagine calling to all these broken pieces of the whole back into the oneness of all, to remind us that while we're separate, we are also part of the divine whole. And of course, because the divine cannot be contained by a vessel, it is beyond us, even if we came back into oneness, right? The divine is this vessel. And of course, it is so much bigger than all the broken pieces of the whole. It's the past, the present, and even the unknown future. And that's one way that I see the divine. I see the divine in other manifestations as well, that hopefully I'll have a chance, but I will pause there so you can continue.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that imagery of holding God in that way.
Yeah, I think you said something very important there. And I just sort of feel this calm just listening to you for a few minutes here about this and wanting to hear more about your experience of God from a personal perspective, and just, you know, and it's very much your personal perspective, but in your work with so many people. but that I find it very enriching. But what I think is so beautiful is I can meet Tom, as a good friend. I can meet you, hear about your experiences of God. But what you mentioned, this vessel, all the pieces broken apart, right? And the fact that what's really powerful about I think the best parts of let's say Judeo-Christian practice is when there's the idea of the body of Christ or the body of the community coming together, that all the different fragments coming together, not only worshiping God and connecting to God individually, but connecting as a community in a shared understanding, a shared experience of a collective understanding of God and a collective communion with God. And I think, and that communion with God as beings together, and that forming a community that's in communion with God is a community that can help solve the poly crisis, can help solve social justice issues. And but that's why so there's the individual experience of God, but then there's that communal experience of God that is so critical for us to come together, because we're social beings, and that's how we become powerful in communion with others who are also in communion with God individually within themselves. And I know that's very central to your work, but I wanted to hear how it expresses in your work, that communion, as well as in the dog part of this process, of course, too.
So yeah, I have my dog, and this is normally our walk time, so he's might be a little disruptive at times. So I apologize. I'll probably put him out again in a minute, but then he'll want to come back in. And of course, dog is God backwards. So there you go. So I'll share a couple things here. So the first thing I want to share is that one evening I was walking outside around sunset. I live in the Bay Area. It's a beautiful, it was on Shabbat. It was on Friday night. Shabbat was just about to begin, and it was a beautiful view that I had of the sky and the kind of the view behind you, but not quite so close up, of the Golden Gate. And I saw the moon and some stars starting to come out. And it was really a mystical connection with the divine of all that is. And I realized in that moment that the world is held together by love. That we think of it as gravity. Scientists, let's say, call it gravity. But imagine if we reclaimed that and called it love, and that the planets are aligned the way they are aligned, and things flow and move not because of this technical term of gravity, but because of this yearning for connection and love. And when I was walking that evening and saw the sky, I really did have this mystical experience of God, of love showing up in the world. And it was quite profound. So that was, like, for me, this very individual experience, right? And I can share that with people, and then they can go on their walks and perhaps have an experience. I can't force them to have an experience. I can lead guided visualizations of the universe in which people sometimes have an experience of something so vastly beyond themselves that they have a connection with some spiritual energy of the universe. But then, of course, there is this other way of holding God that is also very important in my practice and in my work with my community, Beit Tikkun. And you can look us up at beitktikkun.org, BEYTTIKKUN.org. And in that work, Michael, this is what you're talking about, is both God in community and God in action. And Abraham Joshua Heschel says, God is in search of, he said man, but we'll say humanity. God is in search of human beings. That in the story of Exodus, God didn't wave God's magic wand and free the Hebrews from oppression and from slavery. It's not actually what happened. Right? God called Moses and Aaron and Miriam and the midwives, and even Pharaoh's daughter in the seed of the empire to rescue Moses and to help engage in the freedom of the Hebrews. And that God is what I like to think of as the God of possibilities, the God that makes possible the transformation from that which is to that which can and ought to be. And in a lot of Jewish teachings, we think of that God as the God of being, because the letters of God in the Torah are Yud, He, Vav, He. He, Vav, He is the present tense of being, and a Yud in front of it is the future tense in the male, in the masculine, because Hebrew is a gendered language. But so it's a movement from that which is to that which can and ought to be. And for that movement to happen, we human beings have to be the ones to make it happen. And when we make it happen, then something miraculous happens in the universe that we cannot explain through scientific definitions, through what we think is going to happen and unfold. Something else happens in addition to our movements. So I always say, if we make the steps toward transforming the destruction of the environment, if we collectively engage in actions of social justice or transformation in Palestine, that actually, even though scientists say the rubble will take over 80 years to remove, if there's a swell of humanities engaging in action, miracles could happen. And we don't know what that would look like. And they could happen fast at that point. But we have to kind of get up to that top of that mountaintop, like Martin Luther King spoke about, see the future, and know that not one person is going to stand on that mountaintop and see it. Like no leader of a movement is going to do it themselves. They're only as great as the movement that they create. And we all have to get to the top of the mountaintop, envision and hold the possibility of that loving and just and equitable future with reparations and repair and all of that entails, and responsibility and repentance, and push that boulder, if you will, over the top. And then who knows what will unfold? I know that I don't. And that is, of course, a leap of faith. And that also is God. And I'm just going to step away to open the door. I'll be back, but I can hear you. And I apologize.
Michael, what's there for you, and what
I was
Rabbi Kat just shared?
waiting for the dog, the God backwards to be. So I feel peace, and I feel peace, and I feel this peace over me when I listen to this. But what I'm trying to feel into, Rabbi, is that community and humans working together in hope are very, very powerful, right? But the question is there something special about, well, first of all, I would say, in some ways, the Abrahamic religions would say if your communion with God is not expressed in actions, there's something missing, right? So the idea that we need to work together and do tangible works of mercy and service to other people is really critical to show, to see God in other people. But what I'm thinking is that, in a highly secularized society, people would say, well, that's very beautiful, but I can have a secular social justice group do the same thing. And it's nice that, this particular Jewish or Christian tradition helps motivate people to care, but I don't need that. And I think there's something I wanted to ask you about, that a community of faith somehow brings something to this process that is unique and valuable. And I don't know what that unique and valuable element is, whether it's the ability to endure through suffering, maybe perhaps better in a secular perspective, maybe to be better, maybe be able to better hold the challenges of working together through these difficult challenges by having God. as a shared anchor and lodestar for the community. But, I'm just saying there's a group of loving, caring, loving, beautiful people who want to help a community. And then there's a loving, caring group of people who come from a community, for example, like your community in Tikkun. And I think there's a difference. And I just wondered if you thought you could explain perhaps some of the advantages of and some of the differences of a community that's under God, in communion with God, versus a purely secular organization.
I will try, and I want to be really careful about making assumptions that communities coming together under a vision of God are somehow more equipped or better than communities that are secular. I know for me, engaging in social justice action work, coming from steeped in my religion and engaging in it with interfaith partners is incredibly nourishing, grounding, and powerful. And I know that in this time of history, that a lot of secular movements and efforts are seeking to have interfaith leaders and speakers at those movements, in those marches, at those actions. So they are finding something very valuable about that for them, for secular folks. What I think we add to those efforts and to those movements is a level of groundedness, a long view perspective, right? That we don't just base it even in the last 20, 50, 70 years, right? I mean, our Torah, our teachings are thousands of years old. And one of the Friday night prayers that we say it's a psalm that it looks like evil is flourishing right now, but this too shall pass. And that's teachings from thousands of years. And that gives me comfort, and that makes me feel hopeful. And I think that adds it to movements. I also think it lends a level of, I know that people want rabbis and interfaith leaders at their gatherings because it gives them a level of credibility in our society that they might not have otherwise. I'm not sure I think that's a great thing, but that is true, that you get a certain level of entry when you have, as a rabbi, I want to hear a rabbi speak, whether I'm saying something different now than I would have pre-rabbi, doesn't matter. But the fact that I'm showing up clothed in that terminology offers something to people. And I do think it is both meaning, and I also think let's acknowledge it, that in some ways in our society, we hold people with certain labels in a different way than we hold others. And so I want to hold that with an awareness and care and humility. But I think that when I show up at actions that are led by interfaith movements, particularly around Gaza in the past year that I've been doing a lot of, the actions that I have felt for me have been most powerful are those that are grounded in spiritual practice. So that might include silence. That might include us drawing on our preaching from our tradition, drawing on our teachings, whether that's in the Quran or in the New Testament or in the Hebrew Bible or in the Buddhist teachings or any other teachings that spiritual and religious leaders bring to the movements and efforts. So it is, for me, beautiful to see the desire to have spiritual leaders join with secular movements and uplift them together and to be held together in community and communion. And it does add something to those efforts for me. I don't know that it does for all secular people who are there experiencing it. And I know many secular people, many Jewish people, I will say, who are refining their Judaism and wanting are coming to our community and to me and saying, we need to feel connected with our spiritual and religious practices and traditions to help us in this moment.
Right. That's very,
That going out and acting doesn't seem to be enough because it's exhausting. And they're needing to, like, let's say, plant their roots in something.
right.
And so where are they turning? They're turning to Judaism, and they're showing up on the campuses and other places all around the country and the world because they know that in Judaism, there's teachings about justice and working for justice and peace. And they're wanting to also find the spiritual connection, the lighting of the Shabbat candles, the blessing over the wine, the chanting of our prayers, and also understanding what that can offer them in this moment that can sustain them for the long haul, because all of us are aware that this is a long haul.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say, picking up on a couple of threads that I heard in what you were sharing. So we have the poly crisis, we've got the meaning crisis, and some of the phenomena that we've been experiencing has been a lot of othering going on, making people other, and also short-termism, forgetting history, forgetting anything other than the instant gratification. And yet there is this longing for spiritual connection, this longing for experiencing God, not through, in many cases, not through traditional religion, but having a different and oftentimes personal connection with God. And part of why we're doing this week is to try and understand and make sense of all of these things that are happening at the same time. And so I really wanted to pick up on what you were sharing there about that hunger, that desire for that mystical and that personal connection with spirit.
Yeah. If I could add to that for a second, Tom, is that I heard the theme that it's one thing to have a long-term view in your mind, but a religious perspective that's, a lived perspective, it makes it easier to sort of see this thousands of years passage to say, this work might not be finished with me, and it might not be finished with my children, but maybe my grandchildren. And it's one thing to think that way. It's another thing to actually feel that in your bones. And a tradition helps with that. And a spiritual belief that there is eventually the arc of justice, right, is moving in the right direction, is important. But I think, Tom, to what you were saying about the mystical side, I think that these secular leaders reaching out to you, and also let's say, for example, secular Jews trying to come back to their tradition. I was raised in a very secular home and with a scientist father and stuff like that, and I'm very careful about certain things. And like, for example, the placebo effect. And a lot of times people will think, Marx would say, religion's the opiate of the masses, and a modern scientist would say it's a placebo effect. It's a very powerful placebo effect. If we believe it to be so, we get in communities and believe it to be so, then it's so, because of the placebo effect. But I don't think it's just a placebo effect. I think that, and this is where it comes to Tom, I think I'm trying to connect your question with what I'm saying, is that you were talking earlier, Rabbi, about how there's something greater than us. This is not just a random universe. There's something greater than us here that's very meaningful and tangible, that's beyond me, beyond you and I. And that there, in some ways, and it's not just a remote bigger than us. It's something that we can connect to, and something tangible that in some ways you could think of almost like, as an analogy, receiving energy from, not just a long-term hope, but of tangible support. It's almost like plugging into a force that can help us. When you mentioned, let's say, a secular Jew who returns their traditions, it's not just comfort in tradition, but also maybe connecting into a power greater than us that helps us do that social justice work, that helps us help other people, helps us clear the rubble of a disaster. And I was wondering if you could speak to that for a second.
So the image that just came to me when you were speaking was like, this morning I had to move my computer to set it up for our talk, and I had to plug the wires in, right? So it would work. Everything would connect, right? And I think all of us are looking for that plug. Where do we plug in to experience something greater than ourselves? And I certainly was looking for that as a young child. I did not at the time find it in Judaism because, unfortunately, the people and the leaders that I was turning to didn't know how to help me find that. It was more of a secular Judaism, even though it was in a synagogue, you know. So yeah, I think that there is a yearning in all of us for a connection to a force greater than ourselves and even greater than our interconnectedness with other people, that there is a voice that calls to us from the beyond. And sometimes it's quiet and still, and sometimes it's loud, and we can't ignore it. But I know for many of us, if we go into, like, if people right now imagine a place that they feel really safe and secure in, maybe a place in nature that's filled with beauty and awe and wonder. Like, just look at the view behind Michael, right? Look at that incredible sunset. And, you know, and the bridge is human made, which is also awesome and amazing. And then the water and the land, and like all we can say is, wow, fantastic, amazing. And when you think about the fact that really, like, we are so insignificant, right? How many billions of galaxies are there? And even in our galaxy, how many billions of stars, of which everyone, almost everyone, if not every single one, has at least one planet. The likelihood of life somewhere else, even in our galaxy, is massive. Life that, God willing, has gotten this thing better than we got, figured out how to do love and kindness and generosity and caring and building a just world much better than us. Like, that's miraculous. That's just mind-bogglingly crazy and awesome. And when we tap into that, which maybe we only tap into once in a year, even once, if we're lucky, much more often, but it can do a couple things. It can offer us humility, right? Like, each of us are part of that divine spark that's broken from that vessel. We're each here with our unique path, our unique gift, our unique role in this world. Unfortunately, the capitalist reality in which we live tries to box us in, to make us be part of the cogs of the wheel, to make capitalism work. But imagine if you are an artist, you just had what you needed to be able to artfully create whatever it is you're supposed to create in this world, what that would do for our world. Imagine if each person was actually given the freedom to bring forth their amazing, unique gift in this world. That is a miracle. And in Judaism, we're taught, there's a teaching to hold a penny in each, put a penny in each pocket. And when you touch one penny, you realize you are really special and unique and amazing. And you touch the other penny and you realize you are but dust. You are nothing unique and special. And it's to hold the both and. And so that's I think, we're all wanting to be unique and special. And in the context of the universe, we're kind of little and insignificant. But as long as we're here on this planet, why not try to bring forth the divine spark that lives within each of us to contribute to the unfolding of the possibilities of possibilities, to the unfolding of the cosmic consciousness, to get on that, what I like to think of these days as that magic carpet. Just take a leap of faith to get on that magic carpet and imagine being a part of the flow of that ocean, the flow of that cosmic energy that allows us to both feel our interconnectedness, to feel our connection with the divine, and to know that we are part of that. We are not separate from it. God forbid, we are all part of it. And I'm not, so that's what that's what came to me in response to both of your reflections.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I think what's there for me is that cosmic connection, that possibility of possibility is right in front of us, and yet we don't see it. We don't live our life from that place. We're yearning for it. We're looking to plug in, and yet we're already plugged in. We're already part of it. And for me, my hope is that over the course of the week, we can really help our audience understand that we're already part of it, and to see what's getting in the way, what's stopping us from realizing that it already exists.
Yeah. I think part of what stops us from realizing it exists is that we've been conditioned in many ways to believe it doesn't exist. Religious entities, let's say, have often become part of the empire. They've been used to control and further the empire dream, if you will. That's not really a dream, the empire actions and reality of this world, of creating systems and structures of domination and power over. And religion has also often been used and told us that those systems of domination and power over the social structure of the world is in fact divinely created. But that's a lie. Systems and structures of oppression are not part of the divine creation of the universe. Just think about breath itself. We breathe in, we take in air, it becomes oxygen, we breathe it out, carbon dioxide for the trees, they take it in, and they take it in and recreate it, and it becomes oxygen in this incredible cycle of giving and receiving with no domination, no structure of power over. Right? It's just, imagine a world. That's how ecosystems work, actually. But religion and empire has co-opted religion and empire to make us believe that the social structures of society, the political structures of society, the economic structures of society are divinely created. That was the challenge in the Exodus. The challenge in the Exodus for the Hebrews was to look at the social structure of slavery and domination and say, wait a minute, this isn't divinely created. Divine creation is toward liberation. Divine creation is toward the possibility of unfolding seeds that get planted and become flowers and trees and abundant fruit that becomes eventually a Garden of Eden, if you will. And so I think what gets in our way is our conditioning. And then our fear. What would happen if we really embrace the possibility that there's some divine source that's a part of us and a part of everyone? What happens when I see another person who's sleeping on the street as the same spark of the divine as me? Mm-hmm. What happens in that moment?
Right.
What happens if I walk down the street past unhoused encampments and every single person I see there is no less than me? They too are a part of the divine spark of creation. What happens in that moment? What am I called to do? That is scary. And in Judaism, in Hebrew, the word for fear and awe is the same root. It's the same word. So you can say I'm in awe of God, or you can say I'm in fear of God. And the Torah goes back and forth with that. If you could read it as, every time you read it as fear, you could read it as awe, because of course, hurricanes and storms are terrifying and kind of awesome. And so there is that fear I do think there is that fear of embracing the fact that there is this interconnectedness of all and something beyond the all that we can possibly imagine and see. And that's why I said it is a leap of faith. It literally is a leap of faith. And for me, at least, it's a leap of faith that calls to me. I would almost say implores me. I would say actually does implore me to then see that other person as a divine spark of life and to not exceptionalize Jews or any other people, but to see us all as equally divine sparks of life. And then from there, wow, that's a big responsibility.
Thank you. I think what's interesting is that, you know, the idea of the fusion of the co-option of religion for empire is one of the reasons of the process of secularization, the Enlightenment, to try to separate the two. And that's why I try to speak about the fact that if there's a future of God, it's not that. It's not going back to the past where religion and empire are together. And the secularizing impulse, you know, the founding fathers of the United States or, you know, the French Revolution is very understandable. And the interesting thing is that secularization not only separated church and state, it almost separated God from church. And you mentioned how you were going through trying to find that connection to God, that to God you might find in the Kabbalah or something like that. And you had a secular, you know, you were going through a secular when you were being raised, you know, and you were having to find that direct connection yourself. And I think what's interesting is that the Judeo-Christian religion, for good reasons, it's the separation of empire and religion led to secularization, but that led to secularization of the religions themselves, that they became sort of abstract and propositional and not about the heart and not about the cosmic connection and stuff like that. And I think that, like, the idea that there's a future of God in a postmodern world, it can't go back to the Middle Ages. It can't go back to 100 years. But God is ever present. God is still here, and we can be embraced in a way that's not about empire and religion being together, not about a tool of oppression. But it doesn't mean that we're lost. You know, because religion had been misused, we're not left with nihilism. We're not left with hopelessness, that we can return to tradition, that God is still available to people, and it doesn't have to be experienced the way it was experienced in the past. The ever-present God still speaks to us, but we can then commune with it in a different way, in a more direct, participatory, as Tom said, mystical way, right? Where there can be everyday mysticism, not just for special people who come down from mountaintops with messages, but for many of us, if not all of us, many of us can have that experience not just once a year, but more frequently, more regular communion with God, to individually and community. And I think that's what people are hungry for. And the understandable process of 300 years of secularization has made people think, I can't have that. You know, there's nothing more than me. There's nothing more than random evolution in an empty universe. And I think we're wanting to reclaim that original vision, that there is something beyond us that maybe created this world, that loves us, that supports us, that wants justice, for all. And it's not just a human idea, but it's supported by a larger force. And I think that recovery, I think that my sense is that's what your work's about, and what you're speaking to is bringing those together.
Yeah, I mean, there's beautiful Jewish prayers about the fact that God loved our ancestors and like, let us experience that love, God. You know, right now, let us experience that love. And this is in the prayers, it's called Shema and her blessing. So there's the first blessing before the Shema is, God loved our ancestors. Please, God, love us. And then you say the Shema, which is, I don't know, for those who don't know it, it's a prayer that says, there is no separation. Everything is one. The forces of the universe that are nature forces, if you will, and then the divine force of the universe, it's all one. Don't think of them as separate. And then the prayer after is another prayer about love. And it says, if we have this connection with the divine, then we have to bring that love into the world. And in Judaism, so much of bringing love into the world, I'd say really all of it, is about mitzvot. It's action. It is, in fact, love in action. And so there are these mystical ways of accessing and touching into the divine. But at the end of the day, in Judaism, it's taking action. So for me, I think the question is, how do I connect to this feeling, this experience of knowing that I am loved by an unending love? Rami Shapiro has this beautiful translation of that prayer that I was just talking about. I am loved, loved, loved by this unending love. Where do I have moments where I can experience that? How do I tap into that? Rabbi Nachman would say, go into the woods, go into nature, go into, doesn't really matter, and just call out your prayers to the divine and see what happens. And do you experience an answer? Maybe it's silent, maybe it's just a feeling in your body, maybe you experience it 3 hours later. But how do we tap into this experience of love that I experienced that night that I was speaking about earlier at the sunset, where I really did experience a loving hole in the universe. And I felt that I was part of it. Like I knew that I was part of it. And when I really need to feel loved, I will go back, I will bring myself back into that moment. Like, oh, wait, there was this moment I had. I've had it since then as well, but where I do believe that the universe is held together by love and that God is love. That's what the divine, when we talk about God, what we're talking about is the loving, nurturing, embraced and wounded love force in this universe. And that love in community then looks like justice. For me, there is no separation between those, because in a loving world, if we're not separate from each other, then there's a call to be in wholeness and oneness and in creating loving, economic, just social, political systems. And Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel has these two quotes that frame the way I teach and hold my experience of Judaism, which is, on one hand, and they're normally hanging up in my living room, but I brought them to our high holiday services, so I haven't rehung them because I'll be setting them up again on Friday. But on one hand, he says, it's incredible, the miraculousness of life itself, like the awe, wonder, and radical amazement of just being alive. And then I always say, okay, so let's tap into that for a moment, because that is miraculous, right? I mean, if you've ever been at the birth of a child, it truly is miraculous. That is miraculous. That moment is miraculous, that we're just even alive. When you think about the universe, it's incredible we're here. And no, we have no way of explaining it scientifically, really. I mean, we can use the scientific language, but I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's just pure miraculous. And at the same time, he says, our movements, our liturgical movement, our practices must become revolutionary to overcome the delusions and the loss of connection with the hope and the vision of what can and ought to be. And so they're both, and so the mystical God of which we speak calls us to also be the mitzvot, the manifestation of the lived, embodied Shekhinah on this planet, in this little tiny drop of space that we occupy, this tiny little speck of sand at best, in this mystical divine universe in which we also live. And that to me is miraculous and exquisite.
I'm left wondering, you shared the experience that you had, and I had a similar experience about 16 years ago that, from my perspective, once you have an experience like that, you can't unknow it. It's forever there, and it forever shapes your way of being in the world. And I'm just left wondering, we can speak to this. We can extend an invitation for people to go into nature, to go into meditative state or prayer or silence to have their own. But I'm wondering, is there something more we can do to enable every being on the planet to have that connection, to have that experience, to understand that, to use your words, and I agree with them, that love is gravity. Love is the energy of the universe. And
That is
it's a question, it's an invitation, it's a curiosity, it's how do
yeah,
we make it possible for everyone to have that experience?
right. That is a big question. Right? I mean, and the ways that I try to bring that into our community, for example, is through prayer. I mean, one of the amazing things to me about Judaism is we don't actually do this alone. I mean, we have the prayers we do alone, but we do it in community. We do grieving in community. We do all these things in community because maybe because that plugging in community is so much more profound that if you're not accessing it at the moment, but somebody else in the room is, that uplifts the possibility that we can ride on their their magic carpet with them, even if we don't have our own in that moment. And I think for what I try to do is, like I said, bring a guided meditation of our place in the universe. Imagine that see yourself where you are right now, and see yourself connected with all these people on this call. And then imagine going up in a safe spaceship and looking down at just your city for a moment. And then keep going up and looking down at the corner of your world in your country, and then go up a little bit further and keep going up and up until you're looking at yourself, trying to zoom in on yourself in the vast expanse of the universe as a whole. And then you go out, right? The sun is 330,000 times the mass of the planet Earth, just the sun. And then you go beyond that and beyond that. And then can you zoom back in to where you are? And often when people then take that practice into their lives and do it regularly, like let's say for 30 days, once a day, then you start to perhaps have that experience. But I think it's an invitation that we can offer people. What are the practices or ways that we experience divine that we can share with each other individually and I think more importantly, really collectively, so that people can potentially tap into that experience of the divine. I think some of us experience it. I mean, we know people have experienced it when they've had a near-death experience, right? Some people experience it on psychedelics. Some people experience it at a crash in their life, or the birth of a child, or the death of a loved one. I mean, I was with my grandmother, not when she died, but near the end of her life. She was, there and not there. She was in and out of consciousness, as was another friend of mine that I was at as he was near the end of his life. And there's a calmness in that energetic space. There's like a peace that happened where I just felt the quiet, still voice of the divine right there in that room. You know, or I was at the bed of a dear friend of mine who was dying, and she was not conscious, but was filled with her room of loving, dear people, because she was amazing at creating friendships. Everyone felt like her best friend, and each of us were her best friend, and there were hundreds of best friends for her. And we were chanting as she was passing, and this beautiful chant, return again, return again, return to the source of it all, return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. And we were chanting it, and she passed, although her heart continued to beat beyond that moment, but she was gone. And of course, it was perfect for her because she had this huge heart that would never die. But right in that moment, in that room with all of us, we didn't all know each other. There was this divine presence. And I think the way what I would offer to people, which is maybe what you're asking, is how can we help people find that spark of the divine? And I mean, like I said, there's this universal, meditation of the universe can help. Connecting with a time in one's life when you really felt a spark of awe, a spark of radical amazement. Many times for us, for many of us, it might be in nature, but there's many different places. And when you remember that, or when you find that, practice it daily. Mm-hmm. Sit and hold it in your heart and in your soul, in your gut and in your mind, right? You need to hold it in your mind somehow, so it washes over the conditioning that there is no such thing, or that connecting to such a thing is somehow dangerous, or you've lost touch with reality, or but regularly make it a practice to connect with that spark that you have experienced, that moment in your life where you've experienced a connection with that awe, that cosmic consciousness, that divine source. Give it whatever name, don't name it, it doesn't matter. And then try to bring that into communities when you're with communities, not as someone who's like, I have the answer for how you should do it, but just by your presence in that community, just by the way you show up as a spark of the divine with love, just by what you offer the world. Maybe no one knows you're doing it. Maybe you're out, like Tom, you mentioned, you've participated in helping unhoused people or feeding the hungry. Maybe no one knows that you do that. But then when you show up and people experience being seen and valued and recognized, they experience it as something beyond the norms of our society, something that maybe offers for them an experience of divine light and source. Just listening to somebody, right? Like the power of just witnessing and listening with an open heart without having to fix or give advice or tell your story in response or have answers or solutions. Just witnessing the space between two people. The Talmud teaches that when three people are studying Torah together, divine is present there. Buber says in I-thou relationships, the divine is present there. I would offer folks, imagine that the divine is always present there. And just open yourself to the possibility that's so, and see what unfolds.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's part of what we look to do with the broadcast, are to educate and inform, but also to support the audience with actions they can take in their daily life. And I just really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And I'd like to, as we come up on the bottom of the hour, I'd like to invite Jim back in to help us close out today's show. And Michael, as Jim's coming back, anything there for you?
Yeah, I saw that very much. I want to say I feel blessed by your presence today. I felt that. And I felt at peace from the beginning, and I feel more blessed by being in dialogue with you today. And I think that's an answer, that blessing of presence is the answer to the question you raised, Tom, about how to share with other people. That it's like, by the fruits they shall be known. People will feel it, like that person who's hundreds of people's best friend. There's no need to. Her being was an invitation to be like that herself, that lady who passed. And I was really taken by the prayer, and I'd like to say, get it in the prayer of, you were saying, please love us like you loved our ancestors. That was really powerful for me. And I'd like for, if we had a society that felt that way again, I couldn't imagine. The possibilities would be limitless for what we could do together, and it would be a lot of fun doing it. But I think one of the goals of this week for me is to create the space and the permission for people to have that experience. Because what I'm noticing with young people, even people who have a spiritual experience, they feel vaguely ashamed that they can't speak about it in a highly secularized society. That'll be, they'll lose status, they'll seem strange, or they'll be woo-woo or something like that. Or it's just everyone feels like that way. And that it'll be either dismissed or trivialized. And the power of, I'm hopeful in this week to have people who are looking forward, who are very much grounded in the present, and who see God as being meaningful to solving the problems we have today, and embody that presence you embody today, Rabbi, is just a wonderful beginning to this week. I'm so grateful. And I think what we're trying to do here is create the space and the permission for people to have those experiences and to embrace them when they do have them. That's my hope for this week. And you've done a marvelous job of kicking it off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Michael, Kat. Appreciate the comments here. I think that as I've been sitting here, listening to this very rich and textured dialogue, I can't get out of my mind the day that we're commemorating. And the reality that, as I view it, everything that you've been talking about in terms of Judaism and the richness of that tradition, the sublime wisdom of that tradition, that I've had the very good fortune of studying for many years within the context of the deep ecumenism of world spirituality, seems to me to be under assault by what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, supported by the overwhelming majority of Israelis and world Judaism, the IPAC here in the United States, and the Israel lobby, and so forth and so on. And I think what's coming up in Judaism is a aspect of the Jewish Bible that most people didn't even know existed, and that's the book of Joshua. Whereas the Israelites entered Canaan in the aftermath of wandering in Sinai, they committed genocide against the native peoples. And whether it was Jericho or Ai and other incidences, that reality of Judaism is coming up more and more powerfully because Netanyahu and Gallant and the Israeli leaders continue to cite Joshua and the war against Abimelech. So I think that what we're really dealing with, Kat, is an excruciating anvil where the brilliance of what you've laid out as the kind of the essence of the Kabbalah and Judaism and Martin Buber and so forth and so on is being contradicted live on TV with another side of the tradition that is, because it's been done so brazenly and so openly, is challenging many, many people around the world with how to evaluate the tradition itself. So I want to just bring this in because I don't think we can escape it. There's much more that I could say, obviously, on this matter, but I think that if we do not address this on this day, as synchronicity has kind of organized, we would not be doing justice to the tradition and the wisdom that you represent.
Thank you for that. Tears came into my eyes as you were speaking, as have been like every day for a year. I kind of wish I could just play the talk I gave or give the talk I gave at our high holiday services on Rosh Hashanah day 1, which was Thursday, because I spoke about this choice that Judaism has in this historical moment. We can choose to be a blessing or we can choose to be a curse. And I spoke to help us understand how Judaism got here, how the unfolding, I mean, when you're a traumatized people for thousands and thousands of years and you finally get power, some in the tradition are going to pick up the mantle of power as a way to ensure our well-being and safety. So the question I asked is, how do we go from being a people of the book to being a people of weapons, of machinery, of violence? And I explain my perspective on that and the psycho-spiritual context of that. And I'm not gonna go all of that now, but you're right. We have a choice. Judaism is at a important point, but it's always been there in Judaism. The Torah, as you point out, is filled with both voices. It's filled with the voice of love and care and kindness and generosity. Repeated more than anything else in the Torah is love the stranger. You know, and the verses of Jesus that people quote, he was a Jew. He was teaching what he learned from Judaism. It wasn't Christianity that he was teaching. He was teaching Judaism. So that is the mitzvah, the teaching, the commandment that we are meant to carry out more than any other. Love the stranger, take care of the most vulnerable. The term most vulnerable and neighbor is a stand-in for all those who are othered in society. That's our most pressing call in Judaism. That's why I said the actions are what matter. And also in the Torah, there's not sentences in the Torah, but, you know, 3 lines down in the scroll. Yeah, but that world will never exist. So take care of your own, but still love the other. I mean, there's tons of voices, as you said, in the book of Joshua, which we don't know, of course, if that was true, if that ever happened, actually historically, but yeah, we're going to dominate. You're going to get in that land and you're going to take over and God's going to wipe out everyone there. Why? Because they didn't live the values of loving either. So these teachings of loving the other and caring for the other are teachings that every society and every people are supposed to embrace. And when you don't, the Torah says you'll be wiped off the face of the earth. And I like to say, it's because when you create unjust economic, political, social systems, the ecological and environmental systems and foundation of the earth become unbalanced. And so, yes, we will have hurricanes. Yes, we will have plagues. We will have catastrophes. And what is our choice in this moment as Jews? Which Judaism are we going to embrace? Are we going to embrace the Judaism that tells us that the only way we are safe is by dominating and controlling and oppressing others? Let's be honest, this has been the Judaism in Israel for decades. It's not, this is let's just say on steroids. It's just horrific. It is so horrific. But it's been horrific. For 75 years, Palestinians have lived under oppression. The Nakba began, it was what, 49, 48 is when they say, but it began before that too, as they were dispossessing. That was the Zionist political project. But there's a different Zion in Judaism, if you will. There's a Zion that says we are all yearning for a place of shalom, a place of peace and wholeness for all people. There is a place where all of us can be safe. And that should be our real God. That should be our real Zion. Not the Zion of idolatry of land. That actually doesn't make us safe. And Judaism teaches us both, sadly. The Torah has both. I would argue the Torah has the voice of imperialism and domination and power over as a warning. Because God says, don't be like all other nations. The Israelites are in the Torah are arguing for, give me a king. We just want to be like all other nations. And God says, no, I'm not going to give you a king. I don't want you like all other nations. But then they argue, as always happens, because we're good God wrestlers. We like to argue with God. And God says, okay, we'll give you a king. But you know what? That king needs to have a prophet and priests who read the Torah to them every single day, who remind you of the important teachings. But Israel's just become a nation like all other nations. And because Israel equates Israel as a nation state with a religion of Judaism, they get conflated. And I and many, many other Jews are here to say they are not the same. There have been anti-Zionist Jews who have said no to creating a nation state, both very religious and secular, running the whole gamut, who have said creating a nation state of Israel, we don't know what to do when we have power. The Torah wasn't about us having power. It was warning us if we ever got power, but we didn't have power. And now we do, and we're making a mess of it. And it becomes more threatening to the religion, to the spiritual and religious tradition of Judaism, when that power gets equated as the religion, when that nation state gets equated as the religion. They are separate. And I believe my job and our job as Jews who see that is to speak to that distinction. It's conflated. So to deconflate, to separate them. They are tied up in a tangle of our traumas, of our messes. And we need to, there's another beautiful prayer, Ana B'Koach, untie our tangles. I'd like to say untie our traumas and let us return to a Judaism that embraces a liberatory Judaism, which is part of our tradition, the prophetic tradition. Prophets engaged in what I call holy rebuke of the power of the people. On Yom Kippur, Isaiah, we're taught, stood outside of the holy temple and rebuked the people as they were going in to pray on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, and said, how dare you? Is this the fast I want? What about the people who are hungry on the streets? What about the unhoused and homeless? What about the suffering in this world? Why are you going in to pray and fast? I don't want that. Go out on the streets. Take care of the homeless. Embrace the needy. Care for the most vulnerable. That's our tradition. And that's the part of the tradition that Jews need to uplift. Why is it that the mainstream, largely the mainstream Jewish world and Israel are embracing the world of power and domination? Because one of the reasons was in the Bar Kokhba Revolution in 131 to 135, there was Jews, Rabbi Akiba and others, and Bar Kokhba stood up to the imperial empire of Rome, and they were slaughtered and wiped out. 500 to 600,000 Jews were killed. They were exiled, sold into slavery, and Judea was renamed as Syria Palestina. Look what's happening today. Right? It's a mirror image. But the rabbis who survived and who cautioned who cautioned about being zealots, if you will. They were labeled zealots. We would have called them freedom fighters, right? They were standing up to imperial power, became the spiritual ears of the future for rabbinic Judaism. And Jews have a huge level of shame that they literally walked like sheep to their slaughter in the Holocaust. And they will never, ever let that happen again. And to ensure that doesn't happen, instead of embracing a liberatory theology that says the way for your safety is by ensuring everyone on the planet is safe, they embraced a post-Holocaust theology that said our safety comes from power and domination. I have a lot of compassion for embracing that. That's the world we live in. But it's not the Judaism that I want to live by or embrace. And it's not the Judaism that's going to keep us safe. The Judaism that will ensure our survival and safety is embracing each other as embodiments of the divine and ensuring that everyone is safe, is loved, is cared for, is seen, is welcomed, that we engage in the repair and reparations that we need to take responsibility for the mistakes that we've made. That's what the high holidays are about, teshuvah, not just on an individual level, but on a collective level. Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm with you. Like there is this choice that we have as Jews. Mm-hmm. And I embrace all Jews to embrace the Judaism of love. And all who love Judaism, who aren't Jews, and who love Jews, to continually, like a very good friend, remind us to embrace love and hold us in compassion and with holy rebuke when our trauma and our fear that's being whipped up, propaganda, distortions, and lies every day, pulls us back into our trauma selves, and gently, with empathy and love and compassion, help us walk the path toward embracing all life as sacred.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You've done justice to this day. You've brought holiness to this hour. And I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for your courage and your humility and your capacity to embrace the opposites as we wrestled with the angel to the break of day. I think we'll bring this session to a close, Tom. This is a beautiful way to commemorate October 7th. Thank you, Kat. And thank you, everyone. You're welcome to join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. And then we'll see you all tomorrow for day 2 of this extraordinary exploration of God. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.